What's going on, people? Christopher O'Toole here with you guys today, and in this video I am going to be discussing HDR photography. Now, you may have been wondering before this, what is HDR photography? Do I need to be shooting it? Because you've probably seen somebody shoots a really good picture. They mentioned that they shot HDR in order to capture this image or whatever it may be, and so you may be wondering, do I need to shoot HDR? What is even HDR? And so in this video I hope to clear up a few things and to show you guys how to shoot HDR. Now, first off, what is an HDR image? Okay, so HDR stands for high dynamic range. And dynamic range is how your camera sits so it reads the light that it's looking at, okay? So basically when you point your camera at, say a forest and there's a sky in it. Well, see, you've probably noticed if you point your phone at the forest, or a camera with low dynamic range, and it focuses on the forest, the sky is going to be blown out. If it focuses on the sky, everything's going to go really dark because it's trying to expose the image for whatever you're focusing on. And so a really high dynamic range shot will capture both the brights in the sky and the darks and the shadows. And so how you shoot an HDR image is you shoot a bunch of pictures at different exposures in order so you crank the exposure really high so you can catch the darks, and you take several photos all the way to where you crank it really low and you catch the really bright highlights. And so yes, you will be taking a lot of photos at different exposures to capture an HDR image. So HDR really isn't something that you probably wanting to be shooting 100% of the time because it just takes a lot more time. You may not have the equipment that you need to shoot an HDR with at the present, wherever you are. 100% of the time, HDR probably isn't something you want to go with. But also, you may be wondering, can't I just shoot in RAW? And while yes, RAW does have a lot of capabilities, it doesn't process the image. It still leaves the RAW image for you to edit. RAW isn't powerful enough, at least on a lot of cameras. RAW isn't powerful enough. Say your shadows are exposed and the sky is blown out. Yeah, you can bring down those highlights a lot, but because your camera doesn't have the high dynamic range within the camera body to be able to capture really brights and really darks, then the sky is going to be a little bit washed out even if you bring it down. It's basically just bringing a white sky to gray, okay? There are going to be patches like that. And so if you're wanting to capture a really great shot, you need to shoot a bunch of pictures, or say 5 or 6 pictures, maybe even 4. Just whatever you feel comfortable shooting. 5 or 6 pictures to shoot an HDR image, you want to use that technique to capture your photo, and so you can capture the brights and the darks. Now, I'm going to be showing you guys how to do that today, and there are some things that you probably would want to know, or you do want to know if you're going to be shooting HDR photography before you go out and shoot it. Now, also, when you're going and shooting pictures, say a blown out sky may help the look, okay? I know it's really popular in, say, wedding photography or portrait photography, to have everything really light and the sky is going to be blown out. So in that circumstance, you may not want to be shooting HDR. You may just want to shoot RAW, so you can still have a lot of play with your photo. You just don't have the sky absolutely in exposure, because I know it's pretty popular to shoot photography and have it light and airy and crisp. So how do you shoot in HDR? Well, you shoot in HDR by having your camera stable on something and taking a bunch of different pictures at different exposures. Now, thankfully, my camera LCD monitor is touchscreen. If yours isn't touchscreen, you are going to have a little bit more problems with that, because when you're messing with all the buttons and things, you are going to move your camera just a little bit. Your software may have deghosting, the capability to deghost in your image. It'd be best to shoot your camera completely stable. My first piece of advice for you to shoot HDR would be to have a tripod or set it on something stable. And then after you do that, you adjust your exposure with the touchscreen, okay? So have your monitor out and so where you can just touch it lightly and move things around. Now, there are a few things that you will want to take into consideration when you're shooting HDRs. And one of those things is shutter speed. Now, I made the mistake of changing my shutter speed instead of my aperture or my ISO when I was shooting a creek picture. And as you know, in order to get a really bright image out of adjusting your shutter speed, you have to turn it lower. Well, what happens when you take a picture of a creek, or with little waterfalls in it, and you have a low shutter speed? Well, everything's going to be smooth, that smooth waterfall look. Well, what happens when you crank your shutter speed really high, like 1/4000 or something like that, and then you take a picture like that? Well, everything's going to be frozen in time. And so when I took the picture of the creek, the water was looking completely different in all the shots, because with one shot it was smooth, with one shot the water was frozen. and so it didn't turn out very well. And so you'll want to take into consideration what subject it is that you're shooting, and so you'll know what to adjust. Now, in a situation like that, I would leave the aperture and the shutter speed the same and just adjust the ISO. Now, yes, turning up your ISO will reduce the quality of your image and will introduce a lot of noise into your image, and so you just want to take these things into consideration. Of course, if you're not shooting a moving subject at all, adjusting your shutter speed is perfectly fine. Also, another thing that you'll want to think about is adjusting your aperture. You don't want to adjust your aperture because, of course, then you'll have different depths of fields and everything won't be exposed properly. Having different depths of fields and trying to create an HDR out of that, I don't know, I've never done it. I would just say that that's most likely not a good thing to do because of all these different depths of fields you're trying to match up into this HDR image. Now, yes, of course, if you're shooting a wide landscape shot and nothing is really crisp and in focus, the background's low depth of field, then that may be better. That definitely would be better than shooting a close subject and having a nice blurry bokeh background in the back of it and have a lot of that depth of field. Adjusting your aperture would be flat out horrible in that case. So ISO it with moving subjects or with subjects in focus that are moving, and the shutter speed with still subjects are perfectly fine. Another thing you want to think of is if it's windy outside and you're trying to take a picture of a subject that can move, you wouldn't want to do that because then, of course, your subject will be moving, and so your subject will be in a bunch of different places when you try to merge the HDR, and that's really not going to work. Now, it's windy outside right now. It's like really windy, and it's blowing like crazy. And so if I want to take an HDR of a flower right now, that really wouldn't work because the flower would be going all over the place. But if I want to take a picture of a telephone pole, which is the subject I'm going to be showing you in just a minute, then that would work perfectly. That would be completely fine. So you have to think about these type of things when you're going and shooting HDRs. Weigh out the pros and the cons of doing the HDR this way versus another way, and just kind of knowing what to do in certain circumstances so you can produce the highest quality image possible. And so to give you guys a real live example of an HDR, here's how to do an HDR in Affinity Photo, which, okay, you very likely are using Photoshop or Lightroom, but just in Affinity Photo, this is the way you do it. So you want to go up and click File, and then after you click File, you want to go down and click New HDR Merge. Or you can just hit the shortcut if you want. And then after that, this little window pops up. Now from here, what you want to do is you want to click this little Add button, and then once you click the Add button, you want to go and select all your images. I have 6 for this instance right here, the telephone pole, shot at a bunch of different exposures from really bright to really dark, and you want to select all of them, and then go ahead and hit Choose those photos, and then you could just hit Go ahead and OK, and just go ahead and do the HDR merge, but there's a few things you want to click or unclick. I don't know why, but with Affinity Photo, every time it automatically wants to tone map your HDR after you do it. Don't do that, okay? Tone mapping in HDR, I mean, I guess if you're going for a certain tone map, then go right ahead and do that. But do that in post. Just don't do that. Okay, so what I do is I unclick the automatically tone map checkbox, and I click the remove the ghost checkbox. I leave the automatic noise reduction to 40%, I think, which is the default. I just leave it as default. You also want to keep the automatically align your images checkbox checked, and there are a few different things you want to go through. There are a few different things that you may want to choose from. If it's translation, rotation, scale, or perspective, I'll just leave it on perspective just because, whatever. And then from there, you just want to go ahead and merge the HDR. And it will take a while to merge your HDR because, or depending on the speed of your computer, because it is automatically aligning your images. If there was a little bit of camera movement in there, then it will realign your images, and also then it HDR merges. So once it HDR merges, you have this little panel box up here. I just X the panel box out. Just go ahead and start with a clean slate. Then you want to hit V to go ahead and change to your cursor. And then from here, you may be wondering, okay, my image is not, the sky is still blown out in my image. What's the deal? Well, here's where the fun part comes in. So, you want to go up and click your develop persona. Your develop persona is the persona that you will be editing raw photos in. That is what Affinity Photo has for it. And there you can automatically start adjusting your raw image. You want to scroll down to shadows and highlights, check that box, and then take down your highlights. And check it out. Your sky is now is exposed properly. And whereas if it was a raw photo, you were focusing on the light pole, you want to get that in exposure, guess what? Your sky's going to be blown out. here's an example of my sky still being blown out, even though it's a raw photo. So once you do that, you want to go ahead and do whatever to it. What I like to do is I like to go over to the curves and adjust the curves and use that to really adjust my contrast in my photo. Well, for some reason with HDRs, I had to use the contrast slider a lot more than I would have had to on a usual photo edit with just drawing an S-curve in the curve line and adding contrast in it that way. You had to use the contrast. I had to use the contrast slider a lot more than I would have usually with a normal just raw photo. And you can also adjust your shadows. You can turn your shadows up a little more than you would have been able to shooting it normally. And yeah, that is how you do an HDR in Infinity Photo. Well, the starting was how you shoot an HDR, and I'm sure you learned something from that. And of course, when you're done, just go ahead and go to and export your photo out, and you'll have a nice HDR photo. You can, of course, color it however you want, high saturation, low saturation. Let me think. LUTs applied to it. Heaps of stuff. I'm sure you know how to do it. And so, that's it for me today. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope it's helpful to you guys. If you guys do like this video, click that like button down below. Leave a question in the question box, or just a comment if you feel like commenting, you know, if it's a good tutorial or a bad tutorial, you know, whatever. If you do like photography and cinematography tutorials, please click that like button, subscribe button down below, and click the bell beside to get notifications every time I post a new video. And I will see you guys in the next video. Long live the camera.